Our next presentation is by Emilio Cazares, NFT Licensing Legos, Harnessing the Value of Liquid IP. Emilio.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Emilio Cazares. I am the former CLO of SuperRare and now proudly serving as its Legal Innovation Council, where I'm working on a number of NFT DAO and licensing issues that I'll be talking about today. The goals of this talk right now are basically to offer some thoughts, observations, and trends that I'm noticing in the NFT space with respect to IP, and also to provide you a brief glimpse of the future, at least what's happening in the SuperRare ecosystem. I guess before I get started, are there any SuperRare artists in the crowd? Because that would be maybe a meek hand raise in the back. Well, for those of you who don't know, SuperRare is a single edition digital NFT curated marketplace. We were one of the first crypto art platform to do NFTs on the blockchain, and have since established our reputation as the finest in curation for NFTs. We have a very exclusive curation process where we really try to select the best artists and brands to conduct sales on SuperRare. And as I'd mentioned, it's just single edition NFTs, so only one of ones, no PFPs or anything like that. So the issue around NFTs and IP, well, I guess for attorneys in the crowd who are interested in the IP issues, the answer is kind of obvious, right? There's clearly a connection between the underlying asset that actually, excites people, the artwork, the content, and then you have the digital asset, the token, the form of property, if you will. But what is the connection between those two, right? In most cases, or at least in the case of SuperRare, it's typically in the form of a license. Whoever is the owner of an NFT effectively has a license to the underlying property. There's somewhat of a miscommunication, or I guess an industry confusion around what exactly the rights come with, right? Do I get the copyrights if I'm an NFT collector? Am I allowed to commercialize these works? We've seen a varied amount of approaches to this problem, with some projects just dedicating everything to the public, completely open sourcing it, or just putting it in the public domain. Other projects taking, a commercial right approach where you have the ability to commercialize the underlying IP. And each of those has its kind of own flavor and twist, legal opportunities and problems. But what we're really not entirely seeing yet is an actual protocolization of the licensing rights associated with the NFTs. There's a lot of projects and task force that are dedicated to solving this exact problem, where in the future case of NFTs, the licensing rights is not a right necessarily conferred through a paper instrument, but an actual function associated with the asset that can be validated and authenticated on the blockchain. So I'll give you a brief example of the types of licensing Legos that, at least here at SuperRare, we're getting really excited about. The idea of, I guess, just backing up a bit, like, what is a copyright, right? If I write a story, right, and I put that story into an NFT, there's a lot of unlocked value in that NFT that's not just the story itself, right? What about adaptation rights to a movie? What about, if a movie gets turned or adapted into a Broadway performance? You have the actual experience itself, which this NFT industry has really validated just the concept of ownership, right? It's valuable just to own something just because it's mine and because I think it's exciting or because it was minted by the right person. This value of ownership has already been more or less established, but it's kind of conceptual. It's a cultural thing, right? Or maybe a very clever marketing scheme that we're all tricked into. But I think it's a little bit of both, and I think we can all kind of agree on that in a sense, is that we've seen people tap into the marketing phenomenon in NFTs, selling at astronomical numbers, and it's kind of entrenched the value proposition of digital ownership. People don't really have that conceptual of a problem of owning something in digital space anymore. That's something that I think NFTs as a whole industry kind of established. But beyond that, there's so much locked value in that NFT, right? If I have, for example, like a CryptoPunk or a Bored Ape or a single edition artwork on SuperRare, I get to experience it, I get to sell it, it has a secondary market value, but do I get to commercialize the work? Is it easy to commercialize the work? You know, there's a lot of unlocked value that really hasn't been realized because it's kind of difficult to deal with real-life licensing problems and the actual blockchain itself. So I guess the goal for all the projects in the space is how do you unlock that value? How do you create avenues for people to commercialize NFTs in a way that is completely transparent, reliant on deterministic code, smart contracts, so that everybody can authenticate that, hey, this is a licensed use case, not because I had to find the contract or get the other party to rep and warrant that they did in fact own the rights. I don't need to do that if I can get a signature from the artist on the blockchain saying, yes, I've dedicated it to this licensing scheme. Yes, this is in fact a licensing use case. So to posit kind of like the licensing Legos against some of like the business model trends that we're seeing in NFTs, like I'll give a Bored Ape, a yacht club as an example, right? They're kind of famous for this conceptual idea that, hey, like our Bored Ape owners, they own the IP, right? Now, I won't get into the nuts and bolts of whether or not that conveyance is a good legal instrument, because there are problems with that license, but let's assume that every Bored Ape owner, in fact, does have the unlimited right to commercialize that IP. What do you get, right? I think what you get is a lot of off-chain of business models on top of the blockchain in a way that really inspires a lot of confusion, right? If I'm a Bored Ape owner and I give somebody an exclusive license to use a Bored Ape to run a pizza shop, what happens when I transfer that NFT, right? Is the exclusive licensee that's sitting there with the pizza shop and the Bored Ape, is he no longer an authorized licensee for my Bored Ape? Is my transfer of that Bored Ape without the recipient's knowledge of the exclusive license, is it void? If it's void, does the blockchain say it's void? No, that transfer actually happened, right? The blockchain's not going to undo itself just because a real-world abstract right is getting in the way. The blockchain's going to do what it does best. It's going to rely on functions that it can actually perform on. But you see there's kind of an anomaly there, right? You have all of these potential or apparent licensees in this ecosystem that are doing real-world business on top of IP that's embedded in an NFT, but nobody really knows if it's authenticated necessarily. Nobody knows if the right is there. And I guess in a trademark sense, it gets really tough, I guess, for an organization to really decide, like, you know, what type of license cases we like and which types we don't like, right? I could very well see there be a decentralized brand decisions on how we're going to commercialize a Bored Apes. So stepping aside from that example and talking into a more of like, hey, maybe it doesn't make sense to give away all your rights as a creator in the form of an NFT. Maybe it makes sense to preserve those rights, to hold on to them, so that when future protocols exist, you're able to participate in those protocols without a worrying that you're creating kind of any type of inconsistencies with the NFTs you've sold in the past. So on Super Rare, as our terms of service provide, the artist generally reserves all the copyrights, generally reserves the rights to commercialize those works, and the collector is more or less treated as kind of somebody that bought a digital painting, right? They can proudly show it off. They have a license to do certain things with it, but if they want to use it as an album cover, for example, that might be a licensed use case that would be prohibited by the artist. So by kind of ensuring that the artist is always first and foremost the decision maker in a licensing paradigm, I think we're really able to kind of align the incentives and encourage the artist to create more content at the behest of this collector, as opposed to putting the collector in the shoes of somebody who really actually is expected to license the content. So these types of issues, and that, you know, I'm happy to go in more depth with any of you offline, as this is only a 10-minute talk here. But we're really at a conundrum in the NFT space and trying to marry the physical world with the metaphysical, if you will, on the blockchain. There's not a lot of harmony between those two worlds yet, but that is exactly what at Super, at least, we are trying to fix. We are effectively trying to view our marketplace as not just a marketplace, but effectively an intellectual property machine, something that can spit out assets that have actual understandable and hard-code embedded instructions as to what you can do with that licensed content, right? If I'm an artist that has an NFT and I want to give people the right to make derivative works of that IP, I could take like Xcopy, right, as a famous artist on Twitter who proudly kind of contributes his works to an open source a license over Twitter. That's one approach, and that's the approach that makes sense in the digital space because it's really hard to enforce in the first place, right? It's really hard to enforce rights when everything is so free and open. But by protocolizing things, and let's say, hey, I have my NFT, I could mint 100 derivative works license, and the recipients of those licenses have to exhaust those derivative works into a minting contract in order to create that derivative work. You can actually see there's licensing provenance between the derivative work and the actual artist who apparently authorized a derivative work. That's really an exciting concept that we are trying to approach at Super Rare that we think really starts to treat individual rights within an NFT as their own separate composable tokenized instruments.
You are over. I let you go because I'm interested in this topic. I have Bored Ape 1384, and I'm trying to figure out, the rights to be able to go and do derivatives on that. Because if I'm correct, I'm calling it Summer Heart because it's kind of a beach ape. And if I go and do a series of 1,000, and I have some things that are changed around that, different beach apes, and then I sell my ape. Do I sell it to somebody and says I'm selling it, but without the rights to go and enforce anything on the people I've already given rights to? And do you have to add that to the smart contract?
Right, exactly. And if you're relying on a paper instrument that the ecosystem isn't aware of, if it's not on chain or not otherwise public, start to create some confusion. So I am over time. I will leave you with one word of wisdom from a famous artist on Super named Hackatow. Only one person owns it, but everybody sees it, right? The value of engagement is going to start to be embedded into the NFTs as part of the container of what it means. The licensing paradigm that exists on top of that relies on it being open and shareable. Once we kind of establish, as a whole industry, not just with Super Rare, how to protocolize those rights, we can really unlock the value of all these NFTs. So we are engaged in these efforts at Super Rare. We are trying to participate in certain standard development. If you're interested in this conversation, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Emilio at Super Rare. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Emilio.